Welcome to the Plague Hive. 2025 has started strong for Assassin players, with the Hunted releasing last week featuring 2 new Assassins. The Calling in Memphis last weekend was the first major constructed event featuring this new set, and the first opportunity for people to play with these new cards. Joining me today is Dyllon, who chose to bring a somewhat older Assassin, Nuu, and piloted her to a top 8 finish in a field of over 300 competitors. Dyllon, thanks for joining me on the channel today, and congrats on the performance.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's very surreal, and I just can't believe that it happened this weekend. We were talking about it during the week, and I said, this is my weekend, and it happened.
So, like I said, you decided to not bring, one of the new Assassins. You didn't bring Marionette, or you didn't bring, Slip Through the Cracks, one of the new Arachnes. You chose for the maybe slightly more tried and tested Nuu, right? Which so far up to this set has been pretty much considered to be the strongest assassin that people have access to. I think that's pretty much undisputed, despite Shoma Yamamura winning actually on Uzuri the last Pro Tour, right?
Yep.
In a field of Nuu and with a deck that was specifically designed to take down Nuu. I think most people would still say that overall Nuu is the stronger assassin, or was the stronger assassin. So why don't we start with, why did you choose to bring Nuu over one of the new assassins?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest factors and concerns was it was on premiere weekend, so time was a little short. 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks to get when we had all the cards available to us. And at that point, because it took so long to figure out Nuu when she first came out, I just I didn't think I had enough time to figure out Marionette or some of the other, Slippy, or I should say Slip Through the Cracks. Sorry, we call him Slippy.
Yeah, you can call them Slippy. I think even LSS calls them Slippy, so I think we're good.
Yeah. So he was probably a little easier to figure out, but my concern is that he doesn't have that many break points, and he was easily fatigable.
Makes sense.
So it made sense to just stick with what I know, which was Nuu. Now the question was I playing Counter Blessings or not? And I have a couple of Viserai players on the team, and I was really struggling to beat them without Counter Blessings. And some people like to play the 3 Warmongers Diplomacies. And my issue with that card is when you play 3 of them, the first one you play and you draw either another Warmonger's Diplomacy or Codex of Frailty, and then you just lose all your tempo.
Yeah, it's an issue. I've actually, let's just quickly switch over to your list, so that people can actually see what we're talking about. So, like you said, this is obviously a CYB deck, right? And I think Viserai being one of the best decks in the format right now, and I think also one of the most represented decks in Memphis. I don't have the exact numbers in my head right now, but I think it was
it was 59.
59, so actually the most represented deck, I think, right? If I remember correctly. And then there was a bunch of Nuus, I think some 27, 28, something like that. A couple of Enigmas still kicking around, obviously. Bunch of Aurora, and I think those didn't do too well. I think only 3 Auroras made day 2, something like that, right? But yeah, definitely very Viserai heavy meta, and I think most people predicted that would happen. So it's what most people, I would assume, constructed their testing around, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, CYB makes total sense with that in mind, right? Because it just gives you the additional buffer. And the Warmongers argument, yeah, I've definitely noticed that, where I think if I run it now, I'd probably run it at 2 copies just to mitigate the chance of drawing them sequentially, or drawing them in the same hand, because they just don't do much if that happens. All right, so Nuu, because would you say that it was a concern where you went, okay, Marionette has a worse Viscera matchup, or did you just straight up not test Marionette that much and just chose to really focus on Nuu and try to get that list, as consistent as possible within the constraints of the expected meta that we were, getting?
Yeah, so I made two decisions. The first one, as you said, I didn't think Marionette could beat Viserai.
Mm-hmm.
He was so some of the builds I was looking at were very aggressive.
Right.
But my concern was the low blue count, and then when we played aggressive Nuus in the Viserai before, the concern is that if you ever whiffed on a turn where you had no disruption, or you drew the assassin hand with 3 attack reactions and a cheat card, the game was over. You lost on the spot. So we went back to Nuu. I spent 2 weeks trying to incorporate some of the new cards. I think if you've read some of my conversations in the the new channel, my concerns were trying to fit a mark package in the deck with CYB. I was running into issues with room. So I had initially my first iteration of the deck was just to play the dagger, and then a couple of the marked blue cards like the Widow or Black Widow stealth card, and then I cut Venomous Bite completely from Mantle, and it just I couldn't get it to work. It wasn't consistent enough to make Mantle worth it.
Yeah.
I even had 3 Reaper's Calls, blue ones that took the place of the Double Troubles. And I also had 2 Relentless Pursuits that 3 block non-attack action that went to the bottom of your deck if you had attacked, which made sense if I was going to be a fatigue deck. Putting cards back in your deck is pretty good. Yeah, just it wasn't consistent enough to my liking. I was actually, the more and more I went to mark and try to force it, the more and more I was losing my Viserai matchup. So I decided that wasn't correct, and I said I should just, we went full circle, right back to CYB Nuu. The whole old cards, put the old cards back in there. The old the Bonds of Attractions, the Graveyard Hate made sense, and then my Riptide, or I'm sorry, my Viserai testing partner, Nick Gabler, I wanted to test Riptide. And so, because he felt like Riptide was good enough, and he plays Riptide on the side, and I was losing that matchup pretty hard. It's and then so I went and showered that night, and then I got the idea to put Under the Trapdoor in the deck. And I said, I think I could fatigue him if I had Under the Trapdoor, because that card gets around Dreadbore.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
So, and it also had. And Frailty Trap had percentage points into Syndra. So that was, and at first, when I was testing into Syndra, we had the 15 blue deck, not the red line deck that you saw win the calling.
Right.
So that deck wasn't even on my radar. But I was getting 6 value out of my Frailty Traps.
Okay.
And I would just fatigue them.
Okay. 6 value, that's pretty solid. Because I would imagine on some turn cycles, it feels like it would be hard to actually get full value from the Frailty Trap. If they just lead with the daggers, right? I imagine it can be tricky. But if you get it to line up on something like, I don't know, Spreading Flames turn, right? Where they just open with Spreading Flames, and then you have Frailty Trap. Obviously, it's amazing, right? Because they have Spreading Flames, and the Frailty Trap just goes you're not having Spreading Flames this turn, at least not on your daggers, right? So that's pretty great. But I guess you have to really time it, correctly, where you just have to make sure that you sit on this in Arsenal and wait for a good spot where they actually open with an extender, right? Instead of opening with the dagger. So I guess it's just about play patterns and figuring out the correct usage of the card. I can definitely see it being very good. It also hits Fang, right? Pretty hard, actually. So
that was another reason.
Yeah. Like, just I'm still not sure Fang's all that good, to be honest. But just the fact that he's a new hero, right? It's the first event where he's legal, so some people are gonna bring him. That just invariably happens.
Yeah.
People bring the new stuff just because they want to test it out. And I mean, hey, maybe you win and then you get to, bragging rights. I'm the first person worldwide who has like living legend points on this hero. So I think some people just, they're always tempted by that. So it'll happen. And then having something that, hits that hero a little bit is definitely a good idea. So, okay. So let's go over the list a little bit. Starting with the equipment, I don't think there's a ton of like surprises in here. Like, this is a high chi list, right? So you're running like what's that, 6 chi in the main board, and then you have Sacred Art in the sideboard, so you can go up to 7. So obviously you're running Mask of Recurring Nightmares. You're running like Wave, Stilettos, Mistblade, and Tunic. That's also no surprise. Those are standard. That's actually also, while we're here on Wave, that's one of the downsides I found on trying to make the Mark package work, because you kind of have to run Flick Knives for that to really work and really be consistent. And giving up Arousing Wave actually hurts a lot, because that card is like, it's a common, but it's really good. It's really good.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to bring that up. The Rousing Wave, like, is just really good with bonds in combination with that. A lot of players like hate when you still have Rousing Wave up.
Yeah.
So even if you just blind bonds and then try to bluff them, most of the time they see Rousing Wave still there, and if it has a counter on it, they're just like going to give you 2 cards. Even if you don't have it. And I did want to touch on something that I didn't touch on earlier. There was another iteration of Nuu that we did have that was more aggressive, that played Flick Knives and the Retrieve cards.
Okay.
And the issue with that deck was, again, it was aggressive. But it didn't. It lost to Viserai.
Yeah. That's like,
I couldn't get the matchup win percent that I wanted.
That was like my testing too. Like, I tested a CYB list with Mantle, actually, and I ran into the same issues you described, that like you just run out of space because you try to fit so many different things together, right? But also on top of that, even when the deck did what it was supposed to do, right? Like, I got Mantle turns where I got to mantle a bonds with like a double Justinic, like really stupid stuff like that. And I still lost to Viserai because I had to take so much damage to make those turns work, right? I had to keep so many cards to actually make that turn live and actually do something. And then what ended up happening is like, he ate like 1 turn of disruption where he couldn't do anything and he lost tempo. And then I drew a hand that's like your typical assassin hand that just kind of, maybe threatens like 1 card out of them or something. And then he just went back to like stacking a bunch of rune chants, and then just got back into the game, and eventually I just died. Despite gaining like 30 life from Count Your Blessings, you still die to Viserai in the end. Like, it's kind of crazy, but because those aggressive decks have to eat so much damage to actually make those aggressive hands work. So I arrived at basically the same conclusions. It doesn't work, at least not while Viserai is like the best deck in the format. So in terms of equipment, right? So like this all makes sense. What's interesting to me is Nerf Scalpel as like the secondary dagger, and no other daggers in the sideboard, which I think is a correct choice. I don't like running sideboard daggers for different matchups. Just, I think it takes up too much space for like too little percentage gain. But why Nerf Scalpel? Like, run me through that. What's the reasoning there?
So in our testing, we thought Iro was going to be the best deck.
Okay.
We thought, and then, Needle Ban happened, but we still thought Iro was still pretty good, because she just plays very well on 2-card hands, and Iro also plays a lot of defense reactions.
Okay. Right.
So that was one of the reasons. Another reason is that we thought in our testing that Dory Axes was going to be good.
Okay.
So we were going to see a resurgence of that deck. And she has a 3-card 19 with Spill Blood, Sharpened Senses, and a blue. So that was one of the reasons. So they play reactions too. So Nerf Scalpel was pretty good there too. Just a lot of decks in general are playing reactions, especially defense reactions.
True.
So Nerf Scalpel made the most sense. I think, and this Nerf Scalpel is credited to Yuki and Victor Mercado. I think they were right on the money there in Toronto with Nerf Scalpel and reactions. So
okay. It's like traditionally, I think if you go back to like the Mist Veil or even like the Rosetta Meta, right? What you would see in that slot is typically like Scale Peeler. Or sometimes like a second Mist Blade if you have like a more aggressive kind of Nuu. And I've seen some people run Spiders by it, and then they usually have like Scale Peeler in the sideboard for the matchups where you need it. And I think like the Scale Peeler was mostly a result of a Zen, right? Bond Zen, where you have to be able to go like, all right, I have Disruption this turn. I cannot allow you to just put your 7 armor in front of it and have like a 6-card hand next turn. And maybe we're at a point now where that just isn't as relevant anymore. Even with decks like Viserai having like a really good fridge, I think they're not able to convert that fridge into offense as well as a deck like Zen could. So it's maybe less important, to be able to play around that fridge with Scale Peeler. So Nerf Scalpel makes sense there, yeah.
And since you also brought up Zen, Zen is like on 9 defense reactions.
Yeah,
so that was the other reason.
Yeah. He is playing a very defensive deck, or rather like, with the whole wax on, wax off stuff, like just making Zen states. It's a pretty good deck. Like people are kind of like, I think, discounting Zen a little bit after he lost Bonds. Like he kind of fell off the radar, but it's still a very good deck for sure. So. Okay, so that takes care of the equipment. That makes sense. And in the sideboard, in terms of equipment, the only thing we have is Vambrace. I assume this is primarily or like only for Enigma still.
Yeah, I can't win without it.
Yeah, makes sense. True.
Sorry about that. If anybody's looking at to cut it, don't cut it.
Yeah.
You can't win without it.
As long as Enigma is still around, and she saw decent representation as well. Like she didn't make top 8, but I think there was still like over 20 Enigmas, if I remember correctly, right? Something like that.
Yeah, there were 21 or something like that.
So they're still out and about. So don't cut your Enigma tech yet, unfortunately. And then Arcane Lantern is like the AB1 of choice. So I assume you just chose to go, okay, if Kano ends up being a thing, like it sucks, but and he did end up being a thing. I think Kano had like a 70% conversion rate, something like that. Pretty absurd number.
When I saw 11 Kanos in the calling, I was kind of sweating a little bit because it's like, oh, my gym luck is so bad.
Yeah,
but we didn't have to play the matchup this weekend, so
that's lucky for sure. Yeah, because I think on AB1 Kano becomes like very problematic, even for a deck with like 30 odd blues.
It is. I mean, there are some tricks that you do have in the matchup to you can like most of the time. Sometimes they like will put a blue on top of their deck to flip it off Kano with the hat, and so then if you think they had put a blue on top of their deck, you could just like activate Nuu, or flip a chi, activate Nuu, and then maybe get that blue off and hope there's not a blue on top.
Yeah.
So. I did play a Kano on Sunday in side events, and I won.
Okay.
He like was aggressively wildfiring me.
Right.
But I had like played I think 4 counter blessings.
Okay.
And then he was like he leveled or lessons in lava for his last wildfire. And I was like, okay. And he put it on top of his deck, and he drew up. And then I was like, all right, I'm just going to surgical extraction him here and hope he can't kill me. He blocked with 2 reds, and I said, oh, you got 2 more reds in your hand. And he just like gave me this look like, how do you know? And I'm like, hiss over the top. And then he broke his energy potion to activate Kano to bottom the wildfire. And then it was all she wrote from there.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that's pretty rough. Like sometimes, it's Kano is still kind of high variance deck, or higher
Yeah.
variance, I would say, especially now with like the tomes being banned and the pitch stack combo style being a little less like possible, or like very hard to pull off now, I think. So the deck has a little higher variance where sometimes they just kill you turn 2 and there's not much you can do.
Yep.
And then sometimes they just draw like bad hands and you just win even though you only bring AB1. So yeah. That'll happen. But okay, cool. So we got the equipment taken care of, and like if we look at the core of this deck, so like your 51 mainboard, right? A lot of this looks like standard Nuu. This is like any CYB Nuu from like Rosetta Meta. I would expect the core to look like this, maybe like 2 or 3 cards off, right? I think in Rosetta a lot of the time you had E-Strike in there somewhere. That was pretty common back then. And then some lists are playing like 3 Venomous Bites, some are playing 2, like, you know, but that's mostly it. There's not too much going on there. And you got to count your blessings, obviously. If you put them in the main board, some people like to put them in the side because you side them out for some matchups, or, you know, but that's pretty much standard. So the only thing that's new here is Under the Trapdoor. And you already mentioned like why that card is there. So it's just purely a tech piece that you can use to like tutor up your D-reacts from the graveyard, which I think is great. And that makes sense because like functionally we're at, what do we got? We got 3, 6, 9, 11, 14. So we got the 16 blue stealths, which is like also kind of standard, I feel like.
Yeah, I wouldn't go lower than 15.
Yeah.
That's just, and that's because of Justin Nick.
Yep. Agreed.
I was at like 18 stealth for mantle to make that work. I think it's like you get like it's like 81% to have 1 stealth card per hand.
Right.
So, but then that was kind of like taken away from my sideboard slots, and I was like,
yeah, it starts to get a little bit annoying at some point.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of blue stealths, we got like AOD, Bonds of Attraction, Persuasive, Standard, and then Double Trouble and Under the Trapdoor are maybe the ones that are like, I would say like the flex slots kind of, right? So
yes, I do agree. Double Trouble is just, you are a fatigue deck, so it's just mills more cards.
Right, okay.
And sometimes it attacks for 13 and kills Reinhardt from 12, so...
It does occasionally happen, yes. We have video evidence of it now. But yeah, fair. Because nobody's blocking Double Trouble for 13. I think that
I kind of expected that, actually, because we were getting down to the wire there on time, and I was like, I could make the safe play and drag this out some more, because all of his threats were gone at that point. I knew that.
Okay, right.
And played the Command and Conquer, and just go dagger, Command and Conquer.
Yeah.
And I should have had blocked, but like I said, time was a concern.
Right.
And I
okay.
said, there's no chance that he's blocking Double Trouble, and I know all the D-reacts are gone.
Right. So you just kind of went for it.
Bottom snag, and that was the last snag left, and I knew that because I'd hit him with Bonds.
Right.
So we knew that was out of the way. So I was like, all right, Double Trouble.
Nasty. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes it'll work like that. It's true. Okay, so that makes sense. And then let's go over the sideboard cards, because there's a couple of choices in here that are definitely new. A couple of cards. So before we go over the actually completely new cards, maybe we go over Ardor Desire Body. I've seen that crop up in lists during the Rosetta meta, mostly as an anti-Aurora tech card. Where you just go, okay, Siren's Call doesn't work on her, so I need something else, right? Both to, fill up the sideboard and also to kind of like make up the difference in value. And for a deck that runs routinely like 40 to 45 reds or something like that, the chances of hitting with AOD Body are obviously very high. So was the idea to run this just the same, right? Where you go, okay, into like a Syndra or Fang again. I can just play this, and it's maybe like a 1-card 7, ideally.
It is. Yeah, it's just a 0 for 7 into those red decks. It's very good. It's a 1-card play. Sometimes they don't want to respect it and just take the 3 and let you get a card.
Yeah.
Because you're pretty much going to get a card no matter what, almost all the time.
Yeah.
So it's just against those red heavy decks. That's its own purpose. Its percentage points went up with the hunted. As you said, you mentioned Fang and Syndra.
Yeah.
And Syndra definitely doesn't want to block against you, so it might as well be 0 for 7.
Right. Pretty good. Did you test out of curiosity running like extra disruption in that slot? Because I could also see this being, for example, like erase face or something, right? Or like weakest link. A lot of new decks in the Rosetta meta had like weakest link in the sideboard, stuff like that.
So, weakest link and erase face, probably 2 of my favorite Azuri cards.
Yeah.
My problem is, my problem with those 2 cards is, obviously erase face ain't gonna miss against the Draconic heroes, but it's at most sometimes it's a 2 card 8 against Viserai if it hits. Then you might just prevent Viserai from making 2 to 3 ruin chance on his turn. But weakest link, another card that I do like against Zen. And Enigma, but nobody else. My personal opinion on that card, if it just misses against Aurora, they just take 6 and laugh.
Yeah, they do 100%.
And yes, they're playing like fifth. I think they're on 15 no blocks, but they're all instant speed cards, so they'll just play it at instant speed.
I mean, you're never drawing. I honestly. Right. I don't think I've ever drawn a card off of weakest link in playing it. Like over basically 2 seasons of, at least somewhat competitive play. Like I don't go to like every, calling. I don't take every event, but I play PQs. I play Road to Nationals. I was in Amsterdam. I was playing weakest link for all of these events. It was in my deck every single time. And I don't think I've ever drawn a single card off of it. Because people can just dodge it too well, right? They just play the instance. Sometimes they pitch in response or something. So it's very, very rarely that you actually get to draw a card off of it. But it's just, you force your opponent to take bad lines, like low value lines, like wasting the instance just to prevent the card draw. That's where the power of the card really is.
Right.
But I can see it being, too inconsistent to actually include. So that also makes sense.
Yeah, weakest link is really for KO and Zen and Enigma. Sometimes you could just catch them, and they don't have the ability to get the cards out of their hand.
Right.
Or KO had drew like 3 no blocks, and he doesn't have armor, and he has no choice but they'll take 6 because he's not going to block.
Yeah,
because that's just bad value for him.
Yeah. Okay, fair, makes sense. And then we have looking for a scrap, fantastic extender. Definitely like that's still in the deck because it's one of my favorite cards in the game, I think. We got Frailty Trap, which we already talked about in conjunction with Under the Trapdoor. I guess this could also be Inertia Trap. It's just like meta dependent. What do you want to target, right?
Yes. I was kind of really underwhelmed with Frailty Trap this weekend. But there were some things that we were just wrong on that made sense for Frailty Trap to be played. I think if the metagame is gonna be that metagame, I think Inertia Trap is probably just much better.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. So like in hindsight, you would rather run Inertia Trap in that slot. And going forward for if somebody wants to play this deck at like their Road to Nationals or something, maybe, sub this out with Inertia Trap and try that. Or you could even do like a 1-on-1 split, right? Because with Under the Trapdoor...
There's nothing wrong with that, do it a 1-on-1 split.
Exactly, and then with Trapdoor, you can kind of tutor the one that you need in the moment, right? So that would also be possible to do it that way, okay.
I would say if you're... I just want to touch on this one more thing here. I would say if your metagame is very warrior heavy or Frailty Trap is pretty good.
That's true. It's amazing against warriors, definitely, yeah. Like really, really annoying for them to deal with.
Exactly.
So yeah. Okay, cool. Then we got I'm gonna skip pain in the backside for a second here because I want to talk about shelter first. So Shelter from the Storm, amazing new card. Like I still don't really get why this was printed, to be honest.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it either.
Like we haven't gotten a new generic 0 for 4 D-React in like years, right? The last one was literally Fate Foreseen in Arcane. And I didn't think that we would ever get one again, to be honest. I would have like...
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Like that...
It's just too good.
This card is so good.
Yeah.
It is so good that if that bottom stat said block for 3, it still would see play.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, there's Calming Breeze, which is like the discard effect as like a card. And that even is seeing some play. Like people are experimenting with that and just trying to fit that in. And to be fair, it does have an upside because you can arsenal it and still use it. Yeah, you can't do that with Shelter because you can't discard it from the arsenal, obviously. But yeah, it's just like the flexibility of the card is amazing, and it just has a very good utility into a couple of matchups. So I 100% agree that this is like way better than Fate Foreseen. So if we're talking about a deck, like hypothetically, that has space for a single D-React, right? Just 1 0 for 4 D-React. Would you actually prefer Shelter or Sync? Like, what's your take on that?
My take is it depends on what the metagame looks like.
Right, yeah.
I at first glance, you could make the argument that both cards are on par with each other. But if, like, for example, if Aurora is very heavy, and so is like we'll call it Blue Syndra to clarify things, because Blue Syndra likes to dagger.
Yeah.
So if those two decks are very heavy, then I could see playing Shelter from the Storm over Sink Below. And then if we're like in a metagame where like maybe Azalea and a few other things, or Azalea Guardian, the big attacks like Domblade Dory, whatever.
Yeah.
Sink Below, I think, is just much better there at filtering your hand. So
right, yeah. Because like you can the upside obviously is that Sync still does something when you put it in Arsenal, and Shelter in Arsenal is just a 0 for 4, right? Still good.
Yeah.
But you don't get the extra hand filtering from Sync, so
yeah, hand filtering is still pretty good.
Yeah, it is good. It is definitely, yeah. Especially for I could see that, especially if you're playing like an aggro deck, right? Or like an aggro slanted deck, and you're going, right, I still want to have a playset of D-Reacts, right? For the matchups like Assassin, where D-Reacts are just kind of important. And then just being able to go, okay, I can maybe convert this into, full block, obviously, but then I can also filter my hand to have a little more aggro and a little more juice on my next turn. I could see this just being flat out better than Shelter from the Storm, even though Shelter has the text that, can be like really relevant in a couple of matchups. And I don't know, like, I think, as you said, it's a meta choice at the end of the day. And I can see both coming in and out of decks depending on, how the meta shakes out or how people predict the meta to shake out. Definitely still amazed that we got another generic 0 for 4 D-React. That's not something I would have had on my bingo card for 2025 or any other year, to be honest. Yeah. So, okay. And then last card, Pain in the Backside, which I also agree on. Fantastic card. And I think this is basically in the slot that E-Strike was before, right?
In this deck list, it was actually Scar for Scar.
Ah, okay, yeah, sure.
I like E-Strike. Don't get me wrong. That card has definitely gotten me out of jams multiple times, but its role has already been filled in a way. It makes your hands playable, but so does Counter Blessings.
True.
That's really like the reason why, like, the advantage of playing Counter Blessings is that you get to filter your hand.
Okay.
When you draw those like 3 reactions in a G card. So.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So you got something to spend like extra cards or extra resources on, and you can just convert those in a defensive way in this case instead of offensive, but you still get to convert them. Okay. Yeah. So you play this over Scar, which makes sense because like if they don't block, it's the same amount of damage, right?
Actually, it's even more because of Mistblade.
Because of Mistblade, true. Yeah. So
yeah.
I would think, right, with Pain in the Backside, it's kind of an interesting dilemma with this card because it blocks 2, obviously, right? It's a head jab with extra text. Normally, right, you want extenders into defensive matchups. So you would bring this into something like Enigma, Jarl, Florian, I don't know, like Viserai, if you know they're going to stack you, stuff like that, right? Kano, obviously, too. So any deck where you expect to be the aggressor, basically, you want to bring your extender. So, and the dilemma with Pain in the Backside to me is that if the opponent already wants to block, right, you don't really get to have the text a lot of the time. Because they're just going to be like, all right, I already wanted to block your damage. I'm just going to put a 3-block in front of this, call it a day. So in that scenario, having something like a Scar for a Scar that hits for 4 could actually be better because of the breakpoint, right? Into aggressive decks where they don't want to block, this suddenly gets a lot more interesting. Because now if you have this, you get a free hit from your Mistblade or a free hit from your Nerf Scalpel or whatever other dagger you're bringing, right? Like a Clave comes to mind if you do try to run a mark package. This is probably one of the most efficient ways to mark your opponent, right? So do you actually bring this in versus aggro decks, or is it you purely use it as an extender in like the, I want to say, original sense where you just bring it in against the defensive decks where you need to go faster, right?
Yeah. So I did think about that its role as far as what I wanted to bring it into. So to reiterate my point, that this is just a fatigue deck. Our goal is to fatigue our opponents. So the 2-block becomes a liability in those aggressive matches.
Makes sense.
So in my head, I made the decision to stay away from it for those matchups. It does, however, fill a role that was not mentioned. It is very good in the assassin matchup. Because it is a must block.
Right, yeah. Okay.
And our goal in the assassin mirror, especially the new mirror, is deck damage.
Right. Okay, I can see
not reducing the life total to 0.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, if you look at looking for a scrap, if I have a looking for a scrap being played against me and in the new mirror, I'm just taking 5.
Yeah, you're not blocking. That's kind of how it goes. Like any extender, typically you just go like, okay, is this lethal or like getting me to a point where it might be lethal at some point in the future? I'm not blocking this. So yeah, makes sense. And I mean, it is an assassin card, right? So sometimes you can actually catch somebody out with this, where you just attack with this, and then you just put like Venomous Bite on top of it, and they just don't see that coming. So that's a neat little interaction that you didn't have available to you if you're running something like Scar for a Scar in that slot. So just the fact that it is an assassin card makes this a little bit like, more tricky. And the people have to respect that a little bit and play around it to an extent when you're in the like very low life total. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Always like that about Hurl, but Hurl is just, the text on Hurl is like relevant 1 game out of 50.
This card's better than Hurl.
That's definitely better than Hurl. Yeah, the straight upgrade to Hurl for sure. Yeah. Okay, so that takes care of the 80 cards. Do you think we missed anything? Like, would you go over anything else? I don't think any of the rest is like very specific.
Siren's Call and Sacred Art are pretty obvious, but
like you just
their roles.
Yeah, they do what they do since Mistveil, and it hasn't really changed much. How do you feel about Siren's Call actually in the meta right now? Because there's a lot of like very red heavy decks where you have to kind of side this out because it just doesn't hit enough. So like my personal rule of thumb is like, if I can expect the opponent's deck to run more than, I would say, maybe 18 blues, like 18 or more, I think about bringing in Siren's Call. And if it's less than that, I try to leave it in the sideboard. Like, what's your metric for that?
It's probably about the same. Yeah, I could see myself bringing it against some of the marionette decks because they want like usually one blue per hand. And it's very good. I bring it into like the dual wielding warriors, the dynamo decks.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because they typically have like about the same number of blues. So and sometimes just taking their blue like just destroys their whole turn.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have some mixed feelings about Siren's Call at the moment in the current metagame. It's like this, you need to play 3 of to beat Zen. So it's this really weird, awkward card that you're stuck with because you need to beat Zen.
Yeah.
If Zen didn't exist, I could see myself going to 2.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also it makes Enigma have some awkward plays. They're forced into some bad situations because they don't want you to draw the card. So they might just like play out their entire hand, and then you get the shield or whatever off the board that you wanted to get off.
Yeah, or like they just drop their whole hand, and then you still have like 3 cards or something, and then you can just whack them. That's pretty fun typically. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels awful when it whiffs. So if you bring it against decks that run like a low blue count, it's just too unreliable. That's kind of the problem with it.
Yeah.
It always feels like Nuu feels drastically better to play into matchups where you can play Siren's Call, in my opinion. Like,
I completely agree.
Yeah.
You're much better in the blue heavy decks.
Blue
heavy decks, but
for sure.
You also are, but it's weird because you're also very good into these red line decks for some reason too. So
fair. That's probably because you can just fatigue them typically. Like they're not very good at playing the fatigue game in most situations. So
that's where that's where I feel like most people struggle with playing CYB Nuu is that they think that I have to reduce my opponent's hero life to 0.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. You need to just focus on reducing their deck to 0.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that's what CYB is for at the end of the day, right? It's like making sure your life total doesn't drop to 0 before their deck does. That's kind of the idea with it, yeah. It's also why I think it makes the most sense to run this in like a high chi shell, just because the high chi lists are better at fatiguing, even though initially you might think, all right, I'm taking a deck that already runs a substantial number of non-blocks and I'm putting more non-blocks into the deck. And that seems like counterintuitive at first, but I think it does actually make the most amount of sense. If you want to run like a blocking list, you go for like a low chi traverse, and CYB just doesn't work as well with that kind of new archetype in my experience. All right.
I do agree.
And okay, so we've taken care of the entire deck. Let's go over some of the matchups. And Dyllon has configured all of the matchups, right? So if you want to play this deck and you're unsure how to sideboard, just check the matchups. It's all there. Like, we're not going to go over all of these because that could maybe take a little bit too long. But let's go over maybe some of the, I would say, like more prevalent ones, right? The ones that you can expect to see. At the moment, if you roll up with this deck to like Road to Nationals or something, you're probably worried about, let's say, Viserai, for example. So let's talk about that. So you play Clean 60 into Viserai. As you can see, like the extenders are out, obviously. The D-reacts are partially in, I want to say, like 2 Sings and the 3 Shelter. Which makes sense. Shelter against Viserai is a very good card, obviously. Interestingly, your Arcane Lantern is in the sideboard here. That's probably a mistake.
That is a mistake. I do need to,
We're going to fix that. So by the time you're actually watching this video, this will be fixed. Don't worry about it.
I'll fix it right now.
But like don't do that. I did that once. Like I forgot to bring AB against an Aurora. It did not go that well for me. Let's put it that way. And then you also bring Sacred Art, I assume, just because it's an extra blue. Is that the idea here? Or do you think there's like some kind of graveyard interaction that I mean, sometimes
there is that too. Yes,
they play Rattlebones sometimes, right? So
yeah,
it can be relevant for that. Yeah.
So if anybody's not aware of that interaction, if they play Rattlebones, you ask them what they're targeting, and you could pass over their target or Sacred Art their target,
Yeah.
and they'll lose their action point.
Yep. The Rattlebones just fails. That's a pretty neat interaction.
And just paying 3 to do that on Sacred Art and time walking them is pretty huge.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. Like I've actually had Viserai opponents specifically side out Rattlebones just because they know this interaction is available for Nuu, and they don't want to risk getting completely blown out on their turn. Like if they have full tempo, which is typically when they play Rattlebones because it's so expensive, then doing that just completely cripples them. So yeah, makes sense to not run that. And the rest of it just, standard stuff. You just play clean 60, you try to fatigue them. That's basically it. In terms of strategy against Viserai, because I would imagine that's something that a lot of people are struggling with. How do you approach the matchup?
I did give it an example to somebody that did ask me in the Assassin Discord. One of the examples was if you have a cheat card in your hand, it's better to prevent the 3 damage with the cheat card than to hold on to it and try to mask them because the value is the same. So the card you're going to get from mask is worth 3, and you took 3 damage for that card, but keeping the 3 life is much more important because we're trying to fatigue them. Okay. So it's better to you kind of actually addressed the aggro assassin issue where you're taking damage to disrupt them. It's the same philosophy. Don't take damage to disrupt them. Try to line up codexes into them. Try to light up a leave no witnesses or a command and conquer. Those are must blocks for them. Even if they have armor, they'll give you the armor. And eventually you'll slowly whittle the armor to nothing. Just focus on blocking what you can, gaining life. You'll find it's really about so I'll give an example. There's 3 or 4 turns that'll probably go by before you even try to disrupt them.
Okay, right.
I know it sounds pretty counterintuitive. I will say that is the safest line is blocking them and then disrupting them. But as you get more practice into the matchup, you'll recognize when you can afford to take damage and to disrupt them.
Okay, so just play it safe. Don't take damage to keep the big disruptive hand. Focus on the good lines. I mean, if you draw into Bonds just a Nick and you have Tunic up and Wave is still available, I think that's something that you could consider, just
that's a good 2-card play that they have to respect. If they have Face Purgatory though, don't do that.
Face Purgatory can mess with that. I like doing that when I have that's one of the, I would say, only reasons where, or not only reasons, but one of the reasons where putting Justinic in Arsenal is actually good. Sometimes you get the feeling you're 30 cards into your deck or something and you haven't seen Bonds of Agony yet. And then I usually, when that happens, I go okay, I'm gonna draw a Bonds or a Prognosis in the next 1 or 2 hands just based on statistics. Sometimes it still doesn't happen and then okay. But usually you can kind of bank on that. So just kind of go, okay, what's left in my deck? Is it safe to Arsenal just a Nick here? Am I going to get stuck with this? Also, where are my codexes? That's also relevant when you put something like just a Nick in your Arsenal. Just kind of I don't know, try to keep track of what's still in your deck and where it could be approximately, and then just kind of play according to that. That's usually helpful.
Yeah, those are some excellent tips. I mean, especially if you played all your codexes, it's safe to Arsenal reactions.
Yeah, sure. At that point, you can just, go ahead, just do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, what else can we do? I think Syndra, after, she won the calling, is probably something that we can talk about. And That looks very similar if we're looking at the configuration here. Obviously, in this case, no AB is correct. Also, no Sacred Art. Actually, I mean, Sacred Art has some application into her because, like, sometimes you can catch her with no daggers and just force her to spend a blue or just actually get rid of the daggers. So, what's the idea there? Is it like too expensive to play it, or?
I think since there are two different versions now, if I knew my opponent was on blue Syndra, I would play the Sacred Art.
Okay.
But if I knew my opponent was on red line, I wouldn't risk it.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's fair. Okay,
because they're just not the red line deck ain't. They're not swinging daggers.
They're not daggering that much, right? Yeah. So the chance.
No, they just actively don't even swing it. It just gets flicked and then brought back, flicked and then brought back.
Okay.
So like even if you get one of their daggers, it's like it's not going to do anything.
Okay, because they just don't rely on the weapon that much, and it just doesn't help that much. Okay, I can see that makes sense. Yeah. And you go a little bit over 60 here. Which I guess, like, I mean, mostly you're just blocking in this matchup, I assume. So going a bit over 60 doesn't really, hurt
I could see,
much.
Yeah, I could see if you feel like playing 6 chi is a little too much to deal with Syndra and cutting 2 chi to go back down to 60.
Okay.
That's probably, if you feel that way, I don't know, I feel comfortable on 6 chi cards. Okay. So. Don't really like cutting them. So
yeah, like generally I think against most matchups you don't really want to cut chi. Like the only matchup where I'm cutting chi, I think, actively if I play a high chi list is like Prism. But I also haven't, really figured out a consistent strategy to deal with Prism because it's
okay. I got some advice for you.
Okay,
so if they are so I got a local Prism player named Logan. He loves playing Prism. And he's a good kid. He plays the Angelic Wrath version.
Yep.
So if you got a local Prism player that plays the Angelic Wrath version, don't block. I know it sounds weird, but just don't block.
All right.
And just disrupt them heavily.
Okay.
As much as possible, and then block when you can. If you block them, you're just gonna lose to Angelic Wrath anyway.
Yeah, you get blown out by it. So, that makes sense actually. Yeah, Angelic Wrath is just it's backbreaking when they have it, and you're just like because we have so little poppers, right? You just have Command and Conquer, and that's kind of it. In the main, so relying on poppers just doesn't work, and then if you clean block something and they have Angelic Wrath, you just lose. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you treat it as basically sort of a race matchup, I guess, where you
just block when you like. When I say don't block, I mean like block when you can, or when you should.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. I need to try that because like mostly my approach. Because I have that matchup figured out on Uzuri, so when I'm playing Uzuri, I feel relatively comfortable into Prism. I wouldn't say it's a favorite matchup by any means, but I know what my game plan is and how to approach it, right? And for Uzuri, it's mostly just, okay, block out the first Herald every turn if you can. If you need to let a Herald hit, it has to be the second one in a turn, never the first.
Right.
Yep. And it's just kind of how I approach the matchup. And then if I use a popper or if I use like 2 blocks, it's kind of the same. So that doesn't really matter. But on Nuu, because she runs so few poppers, that just doesn't work, like at least not consistently. Sometimes you get it to work. But for the most part, at some point, Prism just runs away with the game, has been my experience.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess I need to try the more aggressive approach and just try to win through disruption. Gotta try that out. Yeah. Okay, so we got Syndra here. Maybe Enigma, I guess, is also I think still something that a lot of people have issues with. She's still a popular deck. I think out of all the assassins you could potentially play, Nuu probably has the best Enigma matchup.
That is true. Yep. I do agree there. I will there is a caveat now because LSS printed defense reaction on a pair of boots for some reason.
True. Yep.
That card is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a lot of Enigma in your metagame, there is a change that you could make to this deck. After I had a conversation with Jacob Clements
Mm-hmm.
at the tournament about those pair of boots, you could probably cut under the trapdoors
Mm-hmm.
and then cut the frailty traps and play Tarantula Toxin.
Okay.
And the idea of
Mm-hmm.
Tarantula Toxin is that they're just going to defense reaction on the dagger anyway
Mm-hmm.
with the boots and sit behind their mirror guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just play the Tarantula Toxin on your dagger to get over the top to get the mirror guy. And even if they defense reaction the dagger, great, fantastic.
Yep. You can work with that.
It's also one less card to deal with.
Toxin has the same effect as Shred, where if you actually use it on the dagger for like the -3, that persists for the rest of the turn, right? On Toxin, and on Shred for the rest of the combat chain. But actually, if you shred the boots, they can't use them anymore for that combat chain.
Correct.
So that's also a way you could also play Shred, I suppose, in the same capacity, where if they use the boots, you shred the boots, and then the boots are useless for the rest of the turn.
I will mention Tarantula Toxin. That has to be they have to be defending a stealth card.
Yeah, for Toxin, yep. It doesn't work on a dagger. With Shred, you can do it on daggers. Tarantula, I think it's kind of like, these cards to me are side grades, at least in Nuu, because for Nuu, the fact that, Shred can be yellow doesn't matter that much, because Nuu really doesn't, utilize yellows all that well in terms of like pitching them. So the resource advantage is kind of like not that relevant. So it just becomes a question of, do you want a card that is like slightly easier to arsenal, just because of the modality of it, where you can use it on a dagger even if they don't block it, which can definitely happen against Enigma, where they just go like, okay, I'm not going to block this, I'm just going to have like a Spectral Shield take care of it, right? And then if you have Shred, like, it doesn't do anything. And with Toxin, you can just go, okay, I'm going to Toxin on a dagger, pump that up to 4, and still be able to clear my arsenal, for example, if I want to play a Codex or something. So I think it's a question of what modality of it you prefer. But the Shred effect, so the reduction of blocking value, is definitely a useful tool against the Flexors, I think. If you can line it up on a turn where they try to use the boots.
Yep.
So that's definitely useful. Yeah. Okay. So, but apart from that, Enigma matchup, you run Count Your Blessings here. This is like, I haven't personally played a Count Your Blessings list against Enigma. I just played Traverse, which actually felt like a pretty good matchup. For me on Traverse, just because you can like react to their Traverse with your own Traverse, and then you go into their Mirror Guide turn with like a 6-card hand, which is pretty good. Like, does Count Your Blessings work against Enigma? Like, because I could imagine it maybe taking a little bit of tempo out of your hands if it turns up in the wrong hands. Like, let's say they have board state, you need to clear it, and then you draw like Count Your Blessings, and you can't convert that hand offensively. Like, how do you feel about that?
So even if you draw a red one and a blue, like, you could still dagger. Mm-hmm. So it's not the end of the world there.
Yep.
The yellow ones also just pitch for 1 dagger. Mm-hmm. So again, not the end of the world. So there's some nuance to this matchup for Count Your Blessings Nuu, but the end goal is to just fatigue them. Okay. And you're probably asking yourself, how do I do that? So it's best way for the short answer is practice. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to, when they do have a board state, is to kind of basically get them to fight over their board state. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you can like give up a card when they, like, for example, I'll give you an example. Spectral manifestations, right? It makes a spectral shield when they don't have an aura, and then it puts 3 counters on it, and they get to attack for 4, go again. Just block 3 on it, take 1. And then they're like, oh, well, you have 3-4 cards. I'm just going to block out this turn to defend my shield, and then keep attacking you. And so now if they give up their 4 cards to protect their shield, well, now that's 4 less cards
Okay.
in their deck. And so and then like, well, what if they don't have a board state? Then what am I doing? So if they Phantasmaclasm you, just block 9.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Or
if you miraculously drew the 1 of 3 CNCs off the top, then block with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, sometimes that happens. Yeah.
I think it does.
I had a game actually where I just had like 2 CNC in the hand when they played Phantasmaclasm, and it was just like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's like, you can't really depend on that. That's not gonna happen a lot. So
yeah.
Okay, so basically just, when they don't have board state, play very defensive. When they do have board state, try to pressure it so they give you cards so you can fatigue them faster, essentially. Okay.
Yep.
Make them convert their hands on defense, essentially, I guess, is what I'm taking away from this.
That's the goal.
Okay, right. Makes sense. Okay, cool. And I think the rest of these you can just kind of like, figure out as you go through them. Is there anything like where you would say, hey, let's go over this because this is a little bit unintuitive, or is there anything that you want to share with people out there taking a look at this list?
I mean, we could talk about Vincent for a little bit, because sure. That game, so that game was talked about too a couple of times where people said they were struggling with that matchup.
Yeah.
You can actually watch that round 5, me versus Chris Ioli. I know you're going to say to yourself, there was like 2 turns where he did the classic Ruin Blade hands, and that's how I won the game. I was fairly comfortable even after he Rebel and Ruin Blooded me twice. I know the chat thought otherwise, but when you're above like 25 life and in that position, you're probably still fine. With the amount of life you gain from counter blessings. So that matchup is probably an ideal matchup to watch on how you beat Vincent on Nuu.
Right. So, yeah, I'm going to link that in the description of the video so you can check it out. Obviously, the deck's going to be in the description of the video as well. So if you want to give this a spin, you can. Obviously, sideboards are taken care of, like I said. Maybe one last thing that we could go over is the Nuu Mirror, because that's a matchup that is problematic for a lot of new players, weirdly enough.
Yep.
I count myself there 100%. Like, I hate the Nuu Mirror with a passion. It's probably my least favorite matchup in the game. Some people like mirrors. I don't understand why. I generally don't like them in the first place. And then specifically the Nuu Mirror just feels like, I don't know. I feel like the core idea of the Nuu Mirror is like, how bad can I make my deck and still have a chance of winning? And that's kind of what it feels like. Do you have any insight into how to do that? Like how to consistently win? And I know that's hard because you're both playing the same deck, give or take a couple of cards.
Yeah.
But like, what's your general take on the Nuu Mirror?
Don't play Rotten Remains, that's for sure.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
Yeah. So I thought I'd do a lot about the Nuu Mirror until I played Jacob Clements in round 4, and even when I saw the pairing, I had no idea what he was on.
Right.
And then I still was just sitting there dreading it because I knew who he was.
Yeah.
So I sat down, and he flips over Nuu. And I'm Nuu, and I'm like, oh man,
one of those games.
Yeah, and I actually presented 66 cards that round. I kept Counter Blessings in, because some people say boarded out in the mirror. Some people say it's a liability in the mirror. And I was thinking to myself, well, but I can outplay them when they bonzo egg and me. Why would I? Why would I board out something that allows me to do that? Because you could literally just dump your hand if you have counter blessings.
Yeah.
So that, but the other angle of that matchup is life total does not matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's true. It is all about decking your opponent in that matchup. So there were two reasons why I was able to get game round 4, sorry, against Jacob Clemens. One, he had arsenaled Venomous Bite, and he bricked himself.
Oh, okay.
Because he had no legal targets.
Right, okay.
And then 2 was Rotten Remains.
Oh, he played Rotten Remains into you, and then you were able to play that. Okay, right, yeah. Yeah, like that. At the minute I saw that card, I was thinking like, okay, this card is basically only good in the new mirror, and because that's the case, you can't ever run it in the new mirror, because any card that's good into new is automatically better for the opponent when you run it, basically. So that, I mean, that's why these, like, why Levels and Surgical are in the sideboard here, right? Like, they're good cards into new, but you can't run them because they're so much better when they get to play them for free against you. So, and the same thing applies to Rotten Remains. So I'm assuming he took them out in the top 8 match that he was playing against you.
He actually
left them
in again.
He left them in. Okay, damn.
So
Man's
we
committed.
Had a long conversation. He's an awesome person, by the way. If you ever have a conversation with him, you're going to be talking for a while. He's great. So he convinced me to actually board out Couch Your Blessings in the mirror, which made a lot of sense. And I do agree you should board it out. There was no psyops or anything like that. If you have the 21 cards, this list does have the 21 cards. Yeah. So it was very easy for me to take out the 12 cards, the Levels of Enlightenment, the Surgical Extraction, and then I just boarded in the 21 other cards that I had available.
Everything else,
At worst case scenario, you're playing the yellow Counter Blessings if you don't have the 21 cards, because that card pitches for daggers. We've already talked about how I got round 4, but then we played in the quarterfinals, and there was after I was extremely ahead in the quarterfinals. I was up like 10 cards. He had like 15 cards and I had 25. And then he Sacred Arted me and just took full tempo.
Okay.
Unfortunately. And then it kind of just went downhill from there. And then there was a point where I had 2 cards left in deck. It was a Chi, a Justin Egg, and then I had 2 cards in my hand. And it was a Chi and the Sacred Art. And the Sacred Art wasn't flipped yet.
All right.
He Codex of Frailed me. I know all 9 cards left of his deck. So he's got 4 cards in his pitch zone. It was Chi, Warmonger's Diplomacy. And then the 5 remaining cards in his deck in this order were Venomous Bite, Command and Conquer, and then 3 Chi. So at this point, if he Codex of Frails me, I discard my Sacred Art. I held on to the Chi. There's the Rotten Remains in his mana zone. I picked up, I just grabbed a card because I knew I was getting Leave No Witnesses anyway, so it just didn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't remember what card I grabbed. I've shoved it in my arsenal, said whatever, and then I just took 4. And then he milled off the Justin Dick and got my arsenal. And then so the last card in my deck is Chi, and my last card in my hand is Chi. And for some reason, he's like, go to end step, or can I go to end step? And I was like thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, we're gonna cheat him, and then we're gonna play the Rotten Remains, and then I cheat him on his turn,
Oh,
for some reason, because I was tired. I was just tired.
right.
I was
Yeah. I mean,
fatigued.
it was like,
Yeah,
what was that?
and I wanted,
14,
uh,
14 rounds or something?
yeah, 13 rounds, and
13
then
rounds.
like the
Yeah.
last round, I have to play a new mirror, and I'm just exhausted at this point.
That's fair. Yeah.
So his card, like, and trying to track like two new deck pitch deck
Yeah. Yeah.
is insane too.
That's exhausting. Yeah.
So yeah, his so the top card was Venomous Bite after I
Hmm.
looked, and then he's like Arsenal Venomous Bite, and so that means he drew, and he's at 4 life, by the way.
Okay. Right.
So and that means he drew exactly Command and Conquer and 3 Chi
3 Chi. Okay.
if everybody was paying attention, and we could have Rotten Remains to him for 9.
Oh, okay. So he would have actually died from that.
Yeah,
Okay. Damn.
yeah.
All right. So the
So there's an example on why not to play Rotten Remains.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So like that, but that's I think the description of fatigue for that specific game state is very apt because that's what happens mentally to you as well, right? When you play these kind of games, they just go very long. You have to track a ton of information the entire game. And it just takes forever, and you just get like exhausted from doing it. I remember at my last PQ that I played, I was playing against in a new mirror in like I don't remember. I think it was round 3 or 4 or something.
Yeah.
And we got deck checked before the game actually. And so the deck check took like I don't know 10, 15 minutes or something. And then we were playing a new mirror, right? And shout out to Rug, by the way. You're awesome, and that was a fun game. And he's a much better fatigue player than me. Typically, I don't like playing fatigue, so I normally don't construct my decks in a way that fatigue is my primary win condition, right? It happens sometimes, obviously, and I'll play the fatigue game if it ends up that way, but I don't normally plan for it to happen. And he loves fatigue, so I was like, all right, I'm going into like the new game. And I'm playing against. I know it ends up in a fatigue state like 9 times out of 10. Like you either get high roll to death or it goes to fatigue. That's basically how it goes. So I was like mentally preparing. Okay, this is a fatigue game. Let's go there. And then I was like, for some reason, I had complete brain lag and I forgot to take out levels and surgical. So I had levels and surgical in my deck against the new. And he was so paranoid from playing the new mirror that he actually took out Passover and Sacred Art. I think he actually he didn't even run Sacred Art, something like this. I don't remember exactly how it went, but and what ended up was that I actually won that game. Like I just kept pitching my surgicals and levels. I never blocked with them, obviously. I never played them. It was like I can't let these cards go to the graveyard. And somehow I actually managed to fatigue him and win that game. But it took like I think it took a minute less than we had on the clock. And because we got deck checked, the entire tournament was waiting for us to finish.
Yeah,
so there was
that's
like
the
10
worst spot to be in.
It was just like 10 people standing around our table just watching, and we were just like, I know him, he's a good friend, so it was chill, right? Like there was no stress or anything. We were both just like shooting the shit and like joking around. It was a great game, but that was like one of the weirdest games I played in my entire life, definitely. That was a fun experience for sure. All right. Anyway, so we've gone over some of the matchups. Like I said, you can check out the rest yourself. I think most of this should be self-explanatory to an extent. Obviously, if you have any questions about this deck, you can leave them in the comments below the video. I'm also going to link the Assassin-specific Discord, the Spider's Web, where we're both active. So if you have any questions to one of us or like about this deck, you can just shoot them in the Discord, and we're going to be able to answer them. And with that, do you have anything to add? Any last words of wisdom to any aspiring new players out there?
I can't stress this enough. Practice, 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 practice. I know it just, there's no easier answer. There's no shortcuts to Flesh and Blood. Flesh and Blood's a very hard game. So I wish I had all the answers myself, but all I can tell you is don't cut corners, just practice.
All right. Yeah, that's definitely very good advice. I need to take that advice a little more serious myself, but life gets in the way occasionally.
Yeah, and I understand that. Like, not everybody has the same amount of time to play the game. I mean, if it's like any constellation, the 2 weeks leading up to this event, I worked. 40 hours both weeks, and then I was on call one of those weeks. So I mean, I just found time where I could. Just really time management.
You just kind of have to make it work somehow. But also, like, if you can't, put that much time into it, like, don't stress out about it, right? Like, not everybody needs to play. Not everybody needs to play this game at like the highest competitive levels. Like,
I do agree there.
You can just have fun at your armories, casually playing with your friends and just having a great time. And the game is just as good for that as for playing at these callings and PTs and stuff like that. So, if you don't have the time because of like other obligations, don't stress it. Just have as much fun as you can with the game because it's amazing. And I think everybody should play this.
There's a lot of depth to it, and don't stress about wins or anything like that. But what I mean by practice, I mean just practice and learn from your losses. I always say to myself, I learn more from losing than I do from winning.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think losing games teaches you more than winning games. I completely agree with that. Yeah. All right. And with that, we're done for today. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for sticking around with us. And like I said, if you have any questions about anything, leave them down in the comments below. And we'll see you in the next one.